This is Caffeinated Risk, the podcast for security professionals by security professionals. Here are your two self-proclaimed grumpy security guys, Tim McCreet and Doug Leese.
Welcome, folks, to Season 4 of Caffeinated Risk. For our next podcast, we chat with Adam McMath, Director of Cybersecurity at CGI and the former General Manager of Cybersecurity at the Calgary Airport Authority. Adam proudly professes that he pays annual maintenance fees for too many security certifications and refuses to take himself very seriously. In his 25-plus years of managing technical risk, Adams often found himself responsible for chaos immersion, helping organizations respond to and recover from extreme impacts. For a full adrenaline experience, Adam also spent time as a municipal firefighter and brought the training and lessons from emergency services back to cyber incident response in business, government, and critical infrastructure. He is a regular attendee and speaker at Western Canadian events such as B-Sides Edmonton, Calgary, and Saskatoon. Adam believes that Caffeinated Risk subscribers are elite and values your time listening to this episode. And now, let's check out our latest podcast with Adam McMath. Adam, welcome to the show. Thanks for spending time with us today.
No, thank you for having me. It was a good opportunity for me to have one more cup of coffee in the afternoon. If I don't sleep tonight, it's your fault.
Awesome. Awesome. And you got a chance to show off your guitar collection, which Doug was able to pick out on the wall, that I have literally no clue what you have back there. So thank you.
Are we streaming video? Or I only ever pick up audio when I listen to the podcast.
No, just audio. Yeah, just audio. So we have to describe what they see behind you, I guess, on the wall. That's pretty much what we're doing. So, yeah.
Vintage arch tops and a BC Rich Warlock. Now that's...
Yes.
Alrighty. So on that fun note, since I know literally nothing about guitars, I'm gonna get out of that mess here. So there's some things I really wanted to ask you some questions. I know Doug does too, but one of the cool ones I wanted to let people know is your background, because it started not in the traditional IT space. It started someplace else. So I kind of wanted to ask if you could take a couple minutes and just let our listeners know where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Oh, well, I've been all over the freaking place. And I'm a heck of a lot older, I think, than maybe some people give me credit for being as well, because I act like a goof for the most part wherever I go. But I've been taking things apart since I was a little kid, much to my parents' chagrin. Growing up, my childhood hero was MacGyver, just because MacGyver could always work his way out of a situation or anything like that. And I'm not talking about the silly Netflix reboot or wherever it is, but the original.
Yeah.
So when it came to computers, I did kind of start off my career. I went to school and I did start off my career doing computer things, but I found myself very quickly in an existential crisis. And this was actually during a dinner we were having with my sister-in-law. She works with developmentally challenged kids, helping them become contributing members of society and becoming more resilient themselves and becoming more flexible and capable of existing in the world. And I was making people's computers run gooder.
Yeah.
Right? It really didn't feel very fulfilling. The corporate gigs have always, I guess, paid for as well, though, some of the other things that I've done in my life. I've done a whole bunch of backcountry stuff. I've done stuff being on stage with music. I've been a ham radio operator for 30 some odd years. And a lot of those things also fed into, though, this concept, maybe it's the Gen Xer in me, but the idea of having a mission. So at some point, I had managed to find myself in a place where I could be in a fire department as well as being an IT professional. I've had my CISSP for a very long time, too, so I've been doing cybersecurity for quite a number of years. But it was that piece of the puzzle for me. My kids were very young. We picked up a home in a mid-sized bedroom community in Alberta that had at the time it started off as a volunteer fire department. It moved to a paid-on-call fire department. And we'd carry radios or pagers, and when the tones dropped, we would drop what we were doing, head to the station, and go deal with the situation. And over the chunk of the years I was there, my role from probationary firefighter to firefighter to operator, now you are in charge on driving a 50 to 80,000 pound vehicle lights and sirens in the oncoming lanes of traffic and doing all sorts of cool stuff like that, to being the truck commander, to being an incident commander, to being a multi-department incident commander. That was a wild ride. And so many of those lessons I was able to bring back to my career in technology and business and resilience and all those things too. Like finally scratching that itch that I had with that dinner that we had with my sister-in-law, where I was saying, okay, I feel like I'm finally doing something. Canadians are frickin' tough. So if a Canadian calls for emergency services, for the most part, something really bad is going on. And it felt like my pleasure to be able to answer that call. And I remember, the first SEV1 incident I ever worked on for an organization was back in the mid-1990s, and their server got stolen. Literally, somebody walked into their building, walked into their unlocked room where their server was, and walked out with their server.
Oh, man.
And they called the cops, and they called me. It took us 2 weeks to get them a new server, by the way. How much of a real impact was that?
Yeah.
So it helped me redefine, what is a SEV1 really? Is the air still going in and out? Is the blood still going around and around? Because that's very different than something you can actually live without for a couple of weeks.
Right.
It really taught me the value of frameworks. Right? Tim, you and I have had this conversation repeatedly, all about ISO, all about NIST.
We have, yep.
When I was operating a fire truck, when I was responding to an incident in a fire truck, if I blew through a red light or a stop sign, even if I had my lights and sirens on, and I hit somebody, if I killed somebody, I was personally liable.
Yeah.
One of the first things I did when I started writing incident response procedures then for corporations was to say, what framework are we using to define how we're going to respond to things? Because I'll tell you, if you're rolling your own, if you're making it up as you go along and you can't define and say, I used ISO 27035, NIST 800, 6102, SANS Pickerel, whatever, and we rolled our own, how are the lawyers for the insurance companies who are now paying out on that going to be responding, if you even have insurance for those sorts of things?
Right. Yep.
Going back to the proper prior planning bit too. Greek poetry of, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of our preparedness. Are we drilling effectively? Are we actually coming up with risk scenarios in our environments that are realistic, reasonable, functional, that are actually representing business risk? Well, how about that? I don't care if your core router fails. Do you have a spare? Yeah, take it off the shelf and stick it in place.
Right.
But what if something happens where we can no longer trust the data that we've been working on to make trades within our financial system? Does that change the conversation? Absolutely it does. So some of those preparatory pieces become extremely important.
The best part is that all of these things that you've had a chance to wade through in your career, it's a chance to set yourself up for success on the cyber side or on the risk-based side, because it creates, I think, a different perspective, a different lens to look at the problems that we're dealing with. And you're right. Most people, when they get a SEV1 emergency or the call, oh my God, we've got X happening in our network, and then the panic ensues and you can feel body parts clench and off you go and fix it. It's just a tad different than rolling into an accident on a highway and trying to figure out how to get the body out of the vehicle and get him into the hospital. It's a different perspective. It kind of, me personally, I think it would kind of change your thought process on how to manage an incident. You're still following an incident command structure, but I think one of the things that we don't do as well as we could, at least from my perspective, is responding to events, to incidents, and looking at things from a risk-based lens, because we only look at it from that cyber lens, not from a different lens. So we're coming in with our notion of what is, oh my God, that we got to replace that server. It took 2 weeks. Is the company still there? Yep. Okay, we survived, right? Where it's different when you're rolling in as a first responder to an event and you're like, Jesus, I don't have that kind of time. I got to make a decision now. I have to follow a structure now, right?
Well, I think it was the first B-Sides Calgary where I got some of that too. And it was from a dude who showed up who was in the mission control when one of the two space shuttles blew up.
Yes. I remember him.
And I remember asking a question about that, and his answer was, it doesn't matter, what goes wrong in launch. The shuttle doesn't stop. You don't get to press pause on the shuttle. So you have to deal with all of those situations in line. Time doesn't stop an instant response inside an organization either, but I think you're absolutely, I know you're absolutely right. We, as cybersecurity professionals, as IT professionals too, anybody who's in the technology realm, we fail first and foremost to understand what our businesses are about. If I take a look at something like firefighting, it's 95% preparation for 5% action. And we're not necessarily allowed to go that way in business. That's fine. But do we actually understand what our business stands for? That's usually one of the first things I like to do, and I call it business continuity planning, whatever we want to call it. But what is important to your organization? Is it sales? Is it finance? Is it answering the phones? Is it actually your asset protection? Is it actually your network and your core routers? Like, what is actually important to your business? Because then we've got that ability to create priorities when the bad things happen.
Definitely, I think there's a strong misalignment, if that's a possibility.
Yeah.
The technologists are going to have a bias around the technology, but I think working in business prior to computers running everything, we learned there were other things you could do. When something broke, you would do something else. But I am concerned that a lot of modern businesses are at the point where if the computers aren't there, they really aren't operational. And they haven't thought through what if plan B. So we had an episode a little while back, everybody's got a plan until they get a punch in the face. And
Mike Tyson.
It is, yeah. And I picked that quote out because it does make sense. Even though somebody obviously would have prepared, that's not a volunteer position to go stand in a ring with a heavyweight fighter. But even with the preparation, there's still a tremendous amount of things that are going to be essentially audibles in the middle of the event. And the people that are experienced tend to be able to win more than they lose, kind of thing. And I'm not sure how we bring that mindset into risk management and threat modeling around technology, because people want to debate the merits of TLS 1 versus TLS 1.3. And, as a small businessman, I'm thinking clear text or not would be as good enough, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I agree we got to have standards and things like that, but what's the level of appropriateness? And I did want to kind of ask you, because Tim leaked that you used to be the CISO of a rather large airport in Canada.
Well, so we would call it a middle management responsible for a very high risk, a high threat environment, being connected in aviation to critical infrastructure during a pandemic, when there is an expectation from a regulator that you are maintaining an active aerodrome while 96% of your revenue has vaporized.
Yeah.
And discovering that the organization is quite well spread out across multiple vendors who are all trying to abdicate responsibility in some way, shape, or form. Some of the things you're talking about there are really important, Doug. One of them would be just kind of the risk-based model, and that was part of what I used in that environment too, is really kind of figuring out first and foremost what is important to the organization from a, the guest experience. The guest experience was more important to that organization than things like backup generators, and you would think that they would be intertwined, but at the same time, the resilience to make sure that the guest experience would be as good as possible was always right on point. So then, when a risk bubbled up to the surface, we could always point, I always pointed to those 4 big risk areas that I identified and said, okay, here we are. I see this as affecting guest experience. If all those signs that we have around the organization that tell people where they're supposed to get on their plane, if they all disappear, it affects our guest experience. Is that important to you? Yes. Great. It's important to me too. How about we come up with a reasonable approach to addressing that risk. Not saying that there was actually an airport in Germany where someone got a hold of those systems. It wasn't my airport. And in fact, I don't think it's ever happened in an airport in Canada. But someone got a hold of those boards and was able to display naughty things on them and political messages and all sorts of things. And it made international news. That was one of the things that I was able to do. And I'm starting to educate people on the idea of what does impact mean? What does probability mean? How do we actually try to measure these things and identify them as a risk? Is it social media awareness? Is it local news? Is it Canadian news? Is it international news? Where does this fall? And does it matter? Does brand and reputation even end up on our risk register of important risks that we want to address?
Yeah, you would think of something like an airport, for example. They may not like going there, but if it's the airport that's in your city and you have to fly from that city, brand and reputation is probably less important than working doors and correct flight times on signs and stuff like that.
Oh, but brand and reputation is important to that organization, though, too, because they're competing with every other international airport in Canada for more flights to Iceland, to France.
Okay.
Because the airport doesn't dictate that, the airline does. So they have to make sure that they are attracting the best flights to the best destinations so that they can get the most passengers through to deliver the guest experience. And going through that process, it was really interesting, too, because the first day I'm in the chair, I go to the finance group and I ask the question, where does our revenue come from? And they were a little surprised because they were sort of like, but you work kind of in the IT department, don't you, Adam? I'm like, yep. Yeah. Nobody's ever asked us that from the IT department before, Adam. So we're not quite sure how to answer you. I'm like, give me the Coles notes. And they did. And it became, again, part of that discovery of how are we actually measuring risk. The other piece of that puzzle, though, is when we use the word reasonable, what would a reasonable person decide is all over laws and regulations and stuff, too. But we can do that in business, too. And that's where I like some of the language that comes out of ISACA, comes out of ISO, IEC, is that you set a control, you understand what you're measuring success against, and then you come up with an option. Or sometimes maybe 4, and we can group them into we want to reduce risk through compensating controls. Well, that's always nice. But what if the compensating control is more than worth more than the value of the asset we're trying to protect? Why would we put a $400 lock on a $20 piece of something we can get from the dollar store to replace? Or do we want to eliminate risk by turning off something that shouldn't be on anymore? And those are always interesting conversations, too. Adam, I need you to sign off on this risk. And I'm like, no, it's not mine to sign off on. And they're like, well, yes, it is. And I'm like, okay, then I choose eliminate. Let's turn it off. And they say, well, you can't. And well, I don't really own the risk then, do I? I think actually all 3 of us have told that story repeatedly.
Yes.
We can transfer risk to a third party. And usually that comes in the form of insurance, right? But does your insurance cover your brand and reputation loss? Does it recover guest experience loss? Or we can accept risk, providing the risk acceptance is performed at the right level of the organization and is something that we as the security professionals have done our best to advise on. And this is where I've gotten my butt kicked over the years a little bit on this too, is to make sure that there is also that feeling of comfort behind it. It's like, okay, if this is what you've chosen, I can support you in that, because it's your choice, and I've got it documented. Whether you've signed something or not, I've got it documented. And if it turns to crap, then, okay, we'll work through it together. We'll still be your partner.
It's sort of telling when you say you're the first IT person that's ever asked us how we make our money.
Yeah, yeah.
Not surprising, though, from my experiences in the field.
No, I mean, it's not. It just, I guess it's the disappointing part, right? That we've been talking about a risk-based approach to doing security for decades. Like we're on almost decade number 2 now, right? Like we've been doing this since 2005. We're in 2024, and we still have that very traditional and siloed approach to security where I'm going to, I gave a presentation just a little while ago and I talked about the peanut butter approach to security. I'm going to take the few shekels that you give me, the slab of peanut butter, and I'm going to take the bread, which is my threat planes, and I'm going to smear as much as I possibly can to get to the very edge of the bread. It's a super thin layer, but I got it covered, right? Sure, you got the bread covered, but you don't have your business covered because the approach still remains that I'm not asking the business questions. I'm not going in and asking my finance officer, hey, can you walk me through what a quarterly review looks like? What is our last posted revenue? What's the most important thing to the business to be in place and operational every day? Top 3 things, top 5 things, top 10 things. And if one of those things isn't there today or tomorrow, what's the impact? Can you walk me through it? We're not doing that enough still. And that's been almost 20 years now. We're still having interesting conversations, right?
Okay. My world being a ever cyclical group of existential crises.
That's every day in cybersecurity, isn't it? That's pretty much every day in cybersecurity.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so.
Yes, it is. And asking those questions about are we making an impact? I had one of the existential crises which asked the question of do we suck at being led? As security professionals, we are expected to show up and be an expert in the room. Sure, I don't mind that. But at the same time, when we go in and start asking questions, are we listening to the answers? Are we changing our thought processes? I come back to Covey in that. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Or are we just jumping to number 2 without starting at number 1 in the first place?
I think we've watched a lot of that.
And it doesn't say that we have to agree. But when we look at what leadership has become in technology and security is for the most part, a business leader is someone who either worked in sales or worked in finance or something like that. And they get into these CFO, CEO, whatever roles, COO. But your CIO, your CISO typically come from more technical perspectives. And I remember working in retail when I was 14 years old back in the dark ages when there was no color in the world. And everybody who was on the floor would say, oh, if I was the boss, I'd be doing things differently, without having any freaking clue about what the boss was actually going through or what the objectives of the boss were. Yeah. Yeah. And so we do that in technology too. We say, oh, if I was doing it, or the gross misunderstanding, believing that I agree entirely with you, Doug. There isn't a single job function that doesn't revolve around technology, but that doesn't mean we are leading the business.
Correct.
We are still here to make the business as effective as possible. And what I'm finding more often than not is we're having to do that in cybersecurity to say, we are your cybersecurity professionals. We are here to help you merge your information technology with your business objectives in a manner that makes your risk reasonable. And it starts to really impact that way. I'm loving that language. Let's face facts. Everybody knows the risk exists, but for most people, they don't believe that the risk applies to them. Texting and driving is the perfect example of that. Oh, all these idiots around me are always texting and driving while I'm on the highway at doing 135 kilometers an hour, just telling my wife that I'm going to be 15 minutes late. Right? Why is everybody else texting and driving a risky activity but me? No, I'm a safe driver. It would never happen to me. Right? And I am one of those guys who literally puts my phone in the glove box because I don't want to be tempted by the naughtiness of the phone looking at me, pinging at me, whatever. But a CIO I was talking to fairly recently, I asked him the question, where does cybersecurity sit on your enterprise risk register? And he said, Adam, it's number 2. I'm like, fantastic. What are you doing to manage that risk? And he goes, oh, I'll stop you right there. We're not managing that risk. We're monitoring it.
There you go. That's
okay.
Awesome.
And so the conversation didn't go much further than that. But
As
that
it
was,
should have. Yeah.
But that was the mentality, is that until like n equals 1 and we have been impacted, we're not going to do anything about it. An organization I was working with, I don't want to say when, they had their 3rd major breach in 3 years. And the CIO was still responding. And from his perspective, why would he bother investing more in cybersecurity protections? Because they kept on getting better at their instant response.
Yeah.
And the answer I had was, I don't have enough hair left to be able to help you through any more of these because I'm bald as heck. But
yeah.
We have to decide for ourselves where we want to fit in. I come back to the fire department in that regard too. Is when I started, we had a very loose training program. By the time we were done, we had multiple people who were NFPA 1021 certified to deliver official training. We were all medical first responder certified. We were all focused on things that would tell us how to act and how to train and how to be safe and how to deliver things safely, using things like incident command system to deliver it. And I never would have had that experience if I was just a technology guy, right? And it's something that I have raged against every time I end up in a interview panel where the people in the technical interview panel are coming up and they're asking questions like, tell me about your home lab. Tell me how many servers you have in your house. It's like, I don't care about any of that stuff. I want to know, how have... tell me about your hobbies. Oh, you're a scuba diver? Tell me about a dive that went wrong. And that's when you'll find out who can work and adapt in crisis.
I think I like those points because it drives a little bit of things I've had to change my behavior in the last decade or so. Because what I'm finding now is two things that have really struck me this last probably 10, 15 years. One, we desperately need to find a way to help educate security professionals new to the role, whether it's new CISO or new manager, new leader within the space, that you actually run a business unit. It just happens to be called security. And here's the requirements that you need to now have with your shiny new title, but your technical skill set. There's a gap now. What if we could help you at least bridge that gap? That would be to provide that skills training, that uplift of skills, showing them that there's the human side to security is the part that we haven't been able to explain well in the last 30 some years. Is that if you can tell a better story in front of an executive, make them the hero of the story, show them the arc, where they belong, how they can change their journey, and then how you can actually enable the organization, that is such a more compelling story than I'm going to bring out the 200 slide deck that I've been using forever and show all of these, frighteningly large numbers to scare people into action, because that's always worked. I mean, that's the first one for me. But the second one is, what if you sat in with the executives and just asked them, what's the culture in your organization? Can you describe it to me? And then how does the culture enable or support the security program? And the other way around, how does security enable the culture of your organization and support the success? Can you answer those 4 questions? Pick the sequence you want, but can you walk me through those 4 questions? And it's been fun to watch those questions unfold, because it gets uncomfortably quiet and silent in the room when you ask those questions.
And are you listening to the answers? I love that as well. Asking.
I try to, at least me, I'm trying to.
Well, I know you do, and I know Doug does too. But I've also been in battle with people who have spent their lives asking good questions without actually then turning any of it into directed action. And more often than not, what I find is that those same people end up turning some of the responses into weaponized incompetence. I've asked the question. Look at me, I'm asking good questions. Oh, you gave me an answer I don't like, then I'm going to find a way to put a roadblock in place so that you can't move forward. I think that, as the technologists have come into security matters and into business leadership roles, or we've fought for so long to get a seat at the table, and then now that we get the seat at the table, how are we integrating into the businesses to actually deliver a reasonable risk posture, reasonable risk approach? The human side of the story is really important too, is we keep on talking about wanting people to be better storytellers. Mm-hmm. And how do you become a better storyteller? By telling stories. How did I become a better musician? I'm not a very good musician. I suck. But the only way that I have any chops is because I had the guts to go out there and try, and especially to do it in front of people and fail. It hurts sometimes to go up in front of the audience and not resonate. But you know what you do? you go back and you try again. When I was firefighting, and we had a call recorder, and at the end of every call where I was either leading a team or leading the call, I would come back to the station at the end and I would listen to every radio message that went across. Did I get my message across with clarity? Did I get the answers I was looking for? Was I effective in how I was able to communicate to whomever I was communicating with what my conditions, actions, and needs were? And if we don't allow people that opportunity, they're not going to become the better storytellers. They're not going to become the influencers that we need them to have in the organization.
Although the technologies have changed, crime hasn't changed, human nature hasn't changed, business impact for the most part hasn't changed that much.
Well, what happens in cybersecurity when we start to play with the human element first? When we stop looking at vulnerabilities and exposures and impacts and assets, and we start saying, well, what about the people?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure on people not to engage with adversaries because you could be letting ransomware into an organization and stuff. And yet at the same time, that's an unrealistic change in the workplace, because when I started, at one point I was working in a convenience store, and the owner, it's like it's my first evening shift, and he explained how to handle somebody coming in there with a gun and asking for the money. And I go, I don't remember this being in the job interview, but okay, because you're young and you're in need of money, you pay attention. But that was the end of it. You're prepared for what they can tell you about, but they don't really cover everything that could possibly go wrong. If the store suddenly starts on fire, I'm hoping the kid I hired to run the midnight shift knows to call 911. But we didn't really cover that on the onboarding.
Yeah.
And yet there's an expectation now that every single thing that comes up, I should have prepared my worker for. But there's no way we can predict all that would be realistic, and it would overwhelm somebody. So how do we inject common sense back in, or make a choice on a screen reasonable for your average person instead of confusing, so that they could make a right choice?
Well, in fire, we stopped talking about common sense quite a number of years ago, because common sense is not necessarily good sense. So we started talking about what would make good sense in this situation. And the concept of the reasonable person that is all over laws in North America in particular becomes very challenging too, because the definition of reasonable continues to change, which is why it's there. It's not prescriptive. It's all supposed to be about how we get through things, how we think, not exactly what to think. There are certain times when a checklist makes sense, but there's an awful lot more times when your resilience and adaptability to change is what's really going to reduce the pain.
And I think on that happy note, that's where we're going to roll this one. So Adam, thanks so much, man. It was awesome having you on. And look, I got two new triangles out of this. I got my tech, resilient, and adaptive, and I got my founder, fixer, and farmer. So I got new things I can throw into my kit. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Well, all my material is entirely stolen. So there you go. No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate. I'm honored to be here, and I feel silly because most of your guests are very influential, very important people, and I feel like I don't measure up, but I definitely appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation we had.
Absolutely. And similar sentiments. So we're all students in this field. I think that's the big takeaway here. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Thanks for listening to the latest podcast from Caffeinated Risk. Make sure you visit our website, caffeinatedrisk.com, to stay up to date on what we've been working on. Our website has bios of our podcast guests, posts about topics we're passionate about, and even a library of reference material we find valuable in the work we do every day. And don't forget to subscribe to Caffeinated Risk on your favorite podcast service. This way, you'll be notified when we release our next podcast, and you can listen to our previous guests just in case you missed them. Thanks so much for listening to Caffeinated Risk.